This week's episode is titled Foundations for Prophecy. I know, it sounds epic, right? But hang on tight. We're going to break it down into bite-sized, heart-sized lessons, and I promise it's not just about beasts and symbols. It's about the God who sees, who loves, and says, "Whom shall I send?" And I hope you're ready to say, "Here I am, send me." So let's dive in. Our first segment is titled The Glorious Glow Up of Isaiah. Isaiah 6, verses 1 to 8. You know, sometimes we think we're doing okay until the light comes on. Like those overhead lights in a department store changing room that highlight every pore, wrinkle, and regret. That's kind of what happened to Isaiah. He steps into a vision of God's throne room, and suddenly, boom, he's undone. I mean, he is literally crying, "Woe is me," because he realizes how unclean he is in the presence of absolute holiness. Not, "I need a little tune-up," but "I'm toast." And what does God do? Smite him? No. A burning angel touches his lips with a coal from the altar and says, "Your guilt is taken away." That, my friend, is grace. That's the gospel in action. Undeserved, unearned, but freely given. And what happens next? God says, "Who will go for us?" And Isaiah, who was a man of unclean lips, turned into a messenger of mercy and says, "Here I am, send me." So here's the apologetics angle. Some critics say that God of the Old Testament is angry and unloving, but Isaiah chapter 6 blows that myth up. This holy throne room God is also the God who cleanses, calls, and commissions sinners. Moving on to our second segment, the two cherubim and the exit from Eden. Based on Genesis chapter 3, 21 to 24. Let's rewind history back to the beginning. Adam and Eve are evicted from Eden, not because God's petty, but because he's protective. Sin cannot live in the presence of a perfect holiness without being destroyed. So God places cherubims, majestic heavenly beings with a flaming sword at the entrance. Now, that might seem scary, but think again. These weren't bouncers kicking humanity out. They were guardians of hope. The glory of God remained at that gates. Eden didn't disappear. It was protected, held for restoration. In fact, in Revelation chapter 22, paradise returns. And guess what? Those cherubim would later show up again on the Ark of the Covenant surrounding God's throne, reminding everyone that though we are fallen, God still wants to dwell among us. So from Eden to the sanctuary, from exile to reconciliation, God has always had one plan: reunite heaven and earth through Jesus. That's not just a doctrine, that's divine romance. Segment 3. Four faces and some fire. Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 4 to 14. Alright, buckle up. We're heading into Ezekiel's wild vision. Creatures with four faces: man, lion, ox, eagle, wheels within wheels, and flashing fire. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? But all that symbolism has deep meaning. Those creatures, later called cherubims, are the same ones we see in Revelation and Isaiah. They surround God's throne, reflecting different aspects of God's character, power, wisdom, service, and divinity. And what does Ezekiel see above all that chaos? He sees God's throne high and lifted up, Even in Babylonian exile, God is not absent. His glory is mobile. He's not stuck in the temple. He's wherever his people are. Let that sink in. God shows up in the mess, in the exile, in the foreign land. He rides into chaos, not on a war horse, but on wings of cherubim. Let's reflect on this. You may feel like your life is in chaos right now, like wheels spinning out of control. But God is above it. He's ruling in glory. Segment 4. The camp around God. Numbers 2, verses 3 to 25. In ancient Israel, the camp was arranged around the tabernacle. North, south, east, and west. Each side with its own leading tribe and banner. Judah had the lion, Reuben the man, Ephraim the ox, Dan the eagle. Sounds familiar? Yes. Same four faces from Ezekiel and Revelation. God's people literally camped around his presence with his character reflected in every direction. And in Revelation, the New Jerusalem has gates named after the tribes. The point? We're meant to live in the presence of God, not as strangers, not as slaves, but as a family. So imagine explaining the layout of your camping trip to a friend. Yeah, we arrange our tents based on theological symbolism, representing divine attributes from the throne room of heaven. Try saying that at your next backyard barbecue. But here's the point. God has always wanted to live with us, among us, and even in us. Segment 5. From cherub to calamity. Isaiah 14, verses 12 to 14. Now let's talk about Lucifer. Once a covering cherub, like VIP access to the throne room, but instead of reflecting God's glory, he wanted his own. He said, I will ascend. I will be like the Most High. That's the core of sin. Self-promotion instead of self-surrender. But here's the irony. Jesus, who is the Most High, descended. He humbled himself, and that's the contrast. Satan fell from the mountains of God, but the redeemed, which is us, stand on Mount Zion with the Lamb. Satan tried to climb his way up and fell. Jesus stepped down in humility and lifted us up with him. This is where prophecy comes to life. Revelation 14's 3 angels' messages aren't just scary warnings. They're love letters saying, worship the Creator, come home, and we are the messengers. So why do all these matter? So why does any of this matter? Because prophecy isn't about predicting earthquakes or decoding secret codes. It's about pointing people to Christ, the Lamb who was slain, the King who rules, and the friend who saves. You and I are called to reflect the glory of God, not in gold-plated symbols, but in forgiven hearts and willing hands. Like Isaiah, once you know you've been cleansed, you can say, here I am, Lord, send me. Friends, that's it for today's session. The foundation for prophecy is this. God is holy, God is near, and God is love. You're not just a footnote in history. You are a part of his plan to show the universe who he is. So until next time, stay grounded in grace. Keep your eyes on Christ, and remember, you were made for glory. See you next week.